The morning sun blazed across Falcon Ridge Air Base, turning the tarmac into a shimmering lake of heat. Captain Elena Rodriguez adjusted her flight suit and checked her watch for the third time. 0800 hours. The briefing had started without her. She wasn't surprised. Through the operation's tense canvas walls, she could hear the familiar voices of her squadron mates discussing the day's training missions. Laughter punctuated their conversation as someone cracked a joke about the museum pieces parked at Toast Bar, the far end of the runway. Elena knew exactly which aircraft they meant. Walking past the gleaming F-35 Lightning jets, she felt the familiar sting of being invisible. The newer pilots clustered around the advanced fighters, their branded thermoses catching the light as they gestured at tablet screens, displaying synthetic flight paths and automated systems. "Morning, Rodriguez," called out Lieutenant Jake Morrison, barely glancing up from his pre-flight checklist. His tone was polite but distant, the kind of acknowledgement you give a maintenance tech or admin clerk. "Morning," Elena replied, but Jake had already turned back to his conversation with the other pilots. At the far end of the flight line sat her assigned aircraft, a weathered T-38 Talon that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. The paint had faded to a chalky gray, and maintenance tags fluttered from various panels like surrender flags. While the other jets boasted heads-up displays and fly-by-wire systems, her Talon relied on analog gauges and muscle memory. Still, "Flying that antique, I see," came a voice behind her. Elena turned to find Major Derek Hammond, the squadron's operations officer, approaching with his characteristic smirk. At 42, Hammond had carved out his reputation by managing logistics and flight schedules rather than flying dangerous missions. His flight suit was always pristine, his boots polished to a mirror shine. "The T-38 is still airworthy, sir." Elena responded evenly. "Airworthy, sure, but hardly what I'd call mission-ready." Hammond's eyes swept over the old trainer with obvious disdain. "You know, Rodriguez, there's been talk about reassigning you to ground operations. Desk work might be more suitable." The words hit like a physical blow, but Elena kept her expression neutral. "I prefer flying, sir." "Of course you do, but preferences don't always align with reality." Hammond glanced at his tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be personnel files. "Your flight hours are adequate, but your aircraft assignments speak for themselves. When was the last time you flew a combat-ready fighter?" Elena's jaw tightened. 3 years ago, she'd been flying reconnaissance missions in twin-engine Scouts, mapping dangerous terrain and identifying wind patterns that could kill unwary pilots. She'd filed detailed reports about atmospheric anomalies in mountain passes, documenting deadly wind shears that the newer fly-by-wire systems couldn't compensate for quickly enough. Her warnings had been noted, filed, and ignored. 2 months later, Lieutenant Marcus Webb had died in a canyon approach, his F-35's computer systems failing to respond fast enough to the exact wind conditions Elena had documented. The official report blamed atmospheric density and outdated GPS corrections. Elena's name wasn't mentioned. Shortly after, she'd been quietly reassigned. No suspension, no write-up, just a change in duties. The phrase used was realignment of roles and expansion of logistics command. But the message was clear: stay quiet, stay out of the way. "I'm ready for any assignment, sir," Elena said, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. Hammond's smile was patronizing. "That's the spirit. For now, stick with the Talon. At least it matches your experience level." As Hammond walked away, Elena felt the familiar weight of isolation settle on her shoulders. Around her, the base hummed with activity. Ground crews prepped the advanced fighters. Pilots discussed complex mission parameters, and somewhere in the operations tent, Flight assignments were being distributed to everyone except her. She walked over to the T-38 and ran her hand along its weathered fuselage. The metal was warm from the sun, but carried the kind of patina that spoke of countless hours in the air. This old bird had trained generations of pilots, had seen more sky than most of the newer jets combined. "Don't listen to them," said a quiet voice behind her. Elena turned to see Master Sergeant Tony Vasquez, one of the senior maintenance techs. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid, and his weathered face spoke of decades spent keeping aircraft airworthy. "That bird's got more honest flying in her than half the computer-driven toys they're pushing these days," Tony continued, nodding toward the T-38. "And you're one of the few pilots left who knows how to actually fly instead of just managing flight computers." "Thanks, Tony, but it doesn't seem to matter much anymore." "It will," Tony said with quiet conviction. "Sooner than you think." As if summoned by his words, the base's emergency siren wailed once across the morning air. Elena looked up to see a red flag being raised at the operations tower. Somewhere out there, a mission was going wrong. Inside the operations tent, voices rose in urgency. Radio chatter crackled with tension. Elena felt her pulse quicken with the familiar pre-flight adrenaline, but she remained by her aircraft, waiting for orders that probably wouldn't come. The forgotten pilot and her forgotten jet, watching from the sidelines as the real action happened elsewhere. But Elena Rodriguez had learned long ago that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage of all. The briefing room buzzed with controlled chaos as Elena slipped through the back entrance. She wasn't officially invited, but nobody had explicitly told her to stay away either. She found an empty chair in the back row, notebook in hand, trying to blend into the olive-drab canvas walls. Major Hammond stood at the front of the room beside a large tactical display showing the rugged terrain of Devil's Canyon, a notorious stretch of mountains 30 miles northeast of the base. The canyon was a natural wind tunnel, famous for unpredictable air currents that could flip a fighter jet upside down in seconds. "Today's exercise simulates a combat search and rescue scenario," Hammond announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never actually flown such a mission. "We'll be testing the new AI-assisted navigation systems in challenging terrain." Captain Brad Kellerman, the squadron's golden boy, raised his hand. "Sir, what's the weather looking like? I heard the canyon can get pretty hairy." "Current conditions are within acceptable parameters," Hammond replied smoothly. "The F-35's advanced systems can handle anything Mother Nature throws at us." Elena frowned, pulling out her personal weather map. She'd been tracking atmospheric conditions in Devil's Canyon for weeks, noting a pattern of rapidly shifting wind currents that occurred when hot air from the desert floor met the cooler mountain air. According to her calculations, they were heading into a perfect storm of unstable air masses. She raised her hand tentatively. Hammond's eyes flicked to her with barely concealed irritation. "Yes, Rodriguez?" "Sir, I've been monitoring the canyon's weather patterns, and I'm seeing some concerning atmospheric instability. The wind shear indices are showing." "Thank you, Captain." Hammond cut her off with a dismissive wave. "But I think we'll rely on official meteorological reports rather than personal observations." A few pilots chuckled, and Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She looked down at her meticulously drawn weather map, covered in pencil marks and calculations that represented hours of careful analysis. In the front row, she noticed Captain Lisa Park, one of the few female pilots in the squadron, glance back at her with what might have been sympathy. "As I was saying," Hammond continued, "we'll be flying in 3 formations. Alpha, Beta, and Charlie flights will approach the canyon from different vectors to test the new navigation system's ability to coordinate multiple aircraft in challenging terrain." Elena studied the flight assignments on the main screen. Every pilot in the squadron was listed except her. Even the newest arrivals, fresh from flight school, had been assigned to the exercise. "What about the T-38?" called out Lieutenant Morrison. "Isn't Rodriguez flying today?" Hammond's smile was thin. "Captain Rodriguez will be conducting ground-based observations. Her aircraft isn't equipped with the systems we're testing." The dismissal was public and humiliating. Elena felt dozens of eyes on her as she closed her notebook and prepared to leave. But as she reached the door, Captain Park caught her arm. "Elena, wait," Lisa whispered. "Your weather analysis. Can I see it?" Elena hesitated, then handed over her map. Lisa studied it intently, her brow furrowing as she traced the wind pattern projections with her finger. "This is incredibly detailed work," Lisa said quietly. "Have you submitted this to meteorology?" "I tried. They said it was unofficial and couldn't be incorporated into official briefings." Lisa looked up, her expression troubled. "These wind shear patterns you're showing, they're in the exact approach corridor we're supposed to use." "I know. I've flown through that canyon before, back when I was doing recon work. The air currents can be deadly if you don't know what to expect." "Then, why aren't you briefing us on it?" Elena glanced toward the front of the room where Hammond was explaining radio protocols. "Because I'm not flying the right aircraft anymore." That afternoon, Elena sat in her makeshift office, a folding table in the corner of the auxiliary supply tent, updating her atmospheric analysis. Through the thin canvas walls, she could hear the roar of engines as the F-35s prepared for takeoff. Her radio crackled with the pilots' voices as they ran through their pre-flight checks. The T-38 sat alone on the far edge of the tarmac, untouched and unneeded. Tony Vasquez appeared in the tent entrance, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting it down beside her charts. "Thanks, Tony. You didn't have to." "Maybe not, but I figured someone around here should show you some respect." He glanced at her weather analysis spread across the table. "That's some serious work you've got there. Lot of good it's doing anyone." "You know," Tony said, settling into a nearby chair, "I've been working on aircraft for 32 years. Seen a lot of hotshot pilots come and go. Most of them think flying is about having the fanciest equipment and the biggest ego." He paused, sipping his coffee. "But the best pilots I've ever known were the ones who understood that flying is about reading the sky, feeling the aircraft, and making decisions when all the computers fail. You're one of those pilots, Elena. Don't let anyone tell you different." Elena looked up from her charts. "Even if they never give me the chance to prove it." "Oh, they will," Tony said with quiet certainty. "Trust me on this one. When things go sideways, and they always do eventually, they'll come looking for someone who can actually fly." As if summoned by his words, Elena's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the training flight. "Control, this is Charlie Leader. We're encountering severe turbulence entering the canyon. Visibility is dropping fast." Elena's blood ran cold. She grabbed her radio and switched to the control frequency, listening as the situation rapidly deteriorated. "Charlie. 2. I'm losing instrument readings. The fly-by-wire system is fighting me. Control, we need immediate vector change. The wind is not matching our briefing data." Elena looked at her weather map, her finger tracing the exact pattern she'd tried to warn them about. The unstable air mass was behaving exactly as she'd predicted, creating a wind shear that the F-35's automated systems couldn't compensate for quickly enough. She grabbed her helmet and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Tony called. "After her." "To do what I should have done this morning," Elena replied, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "I'm going to fly." The emergency sirens wailed across Falcon Ridge as Elena sprinted toward the T-38. Radio chatter filled the air, with increasingly desperate transmissions from the training flight trapped in Devil's Canyon. "Mayday, mayday, Charlie 3 is down. I repeat, Charlie 3 has crashed in the canyon. Elena's heart hammered as she recognized the voice. It was Captain Park, one of the few pilots who'd shown her respect. The professional calm in Lisa's voice couldn't hide the underlying terror. "Control, this is Charlie Leader. We cannot reach crash site. Winds are too severe. The fly-by-wire systems are malfunctioning in these conditions." Elena reached the T-38 and began her pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved automatically across the analog controls, while her mind processed the radio transmissions. The other pilots were trapped above the canyon, unable to descend through the violent wind shears that her unofficial weather analysis had predicted. "Rodriguez!" Major Hammond's voice cut through the chaos as he jogged across the tarmac. "Stand down immediately. You are not authorized for this mission." Elena continued her startup sequence, the old turbine engines coughing to life with a sound like controlled thunder. Through her headset, she could hear the growing desperation in the pilots' voices. "Control, fuel is becoming critical. We need immediate guidance or we'll have to abort the rescue attempt." "Where are the helicopters?" came another voice. "Grounded. Wind conditions too severe for rotor aircraft." Hammond reached the T-38 and pounded on the fuselage. "Captain Rodriguez, I'm ordering you to shut down this aircraft immediately." Elena looked down at him through the canopy, her face calm despite the storm of emotions inside. "Sir, I have critical intelligence about the wind patterns in that canyon. I can guide the rescue operation. You have nothing but unauthorized weather guessing." Hammond's face was red with anger. "If you take off without clearance, I'll have you court-martialed. Charlie Leader, this is Control. All aircraft are ordered to return to base. We cannot risk additional pilots." Elena's blood ran cold. They were abandoning Lisa and whoever had crashed. The same system that ignored her warnings was now abandoning pilots who needed help. She made her decision. "Sir," she said to Hammond, her voice steady through the radio, "someone's going to die if we don't act. I know that canyon better than anyone. You're off the flight roster, Rodriguez. You haven't flown a combat mission in 3 years. You're not qualified. I'm the most qualified pilot on this base for canyon flying." Elena interrupted, her patience finally snapping. "I've been mapping those wind patterns for months. I know exactly where the safe corridors are." Hammond's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Captain, you are relieved of duty. Security will escort you from the flight line immediately." But Elena had already sealed the canopy and was taxiing toward the runway. Her radio crackled with official protests and demands to abort, but she switched to the emergency frequency where she could hear the trapped pilots. "Charlie Leader, this is Guardian Angel," she said, using an old call sign from her reconnaissance days. "I'm inbound to assist with rescue operations." "Our darn Angel, who is this? Control says all aircraft are returning to base." "This is Captain Rodriguez in the T-38. I have detailed knowledge of the canyon wind patterns. I can guide you to the crash site." There was a pause. Then Captain Kellerman's voice came through, strained with stress. "Rodriguez, Hammond says you're not authorized. We can't follow an unofficial flight." Elena felt the familiar weight of being dismissed, but this time lives hung in the balance. She thought of Lisa Park, who had taken time to look at her weather analysis when no one else would. She thought of the crashed pilot, whoever it was, waiting for rescue that might never come because of bureaucratic pride. "Charlie Leader," she said quietly, "I was the one who predicted these wind conditions. My analysis was dismissed as unofficial, but everything I warned about is happening right now. I can get you through this safely." Another voice cut through. The static, Captain Park's voice, weak but determined. "Guardian Angel, this is Charlie 3. I'm on the ground with a broken leg, but I'm alive. The other pilot, he's in bad shape. We need immediate medical evacuation. The weight of responsibility settled on Elena's shoulders like a lead blanket. 2 pilots were down, and she was the only one who understood the deadly air currents that had trapped them. Charlie Leader, Guardian Angel is taking lead on canyon approach. Follow my path exactly. Do not deviate. Rodriguez, this is Hammond on official channel. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Any pilot who follows your lead will face disciplinary action. Elena switched off the official channel and focused on the emergency frequency. Through her headset, she could hear the labored breathing of the trapped pilots and the growing desperation in their voices. Guardian Angel, we're running low on fuel. If we don't attempt descent soon, we'll have to abandon the rescue. Elena looked ahead at the towering walls of Devil's Canyon, shrouded in turbulent clouds that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. The old T-38 vibrated around her, its analog instruments glowing in the dim cockpit light. No computer assistance. No fly-by-wire safety net. Just her, the aircraft, and 30 years of accumulated flying knowledge. Charlie Leader, this is Guardian Angel. Beginning canyon approach in 60 seconds. Stay on my wing and trust me. She banked the T-38 toward the canyon mouth, leaving behind the safety of the open sky and the comfortable mediocrity of being overlooked. Today, for the first time in 3 years, Elena Rodriguez was going to show them what a real pilot could do. The canyon walls rose up to meet her like the jaws of some prehistoric monster, and she flew straight into their embrace without hesitation. The Devil's Canyon opened before Elena like a wound in the earth, its jagged walls disappearing into roiling clouds that twisted and churned with violent energy. The T-38 bucked and shuddered as it encountered the first wave of turbulence, but Elena's hands remained steady on the controls. Guardian Angel, this is Charlie Leader. We're showing extreme wind shear on our instruments. Are you sure about this approach? Elena's eyes swept across her analog gauges, reading the aircraft's responses like a musician reading sheet music. The old T-38 didn't have modern sensors, but it talked to her in ways the computer-controlled jets couldn't. Every vibration, every subtle change in engine tone, every tremor through the control stick told her something about the invisible rivers of air flowing through the canyon. Charlie Leader, trust your instruments less and trust your aircraft more, she replied, banking left to avoid a downdraft that would have sent a heavier jet tumbling into the canyon wall. The computers can't read these winds fast enough. You need to field them. She led the formation deeper into the canyon, following a path that seemed to defy logic. Where the GPS showed solid rock, Elena found corridors of stable air. Where the satellite data indicated clear passage, she detected deadly wind shears that could tear wings from aircraft. How is she doing that? Came a voice over the radio. One of the younger pilots, amazement clear in his tone. She's flying by instinct, Captain Kellerman replied, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. I've never seen anything like it. Elena allowed herself a small smile. This was what she'd been born to do, not managing computer systems or following pre-programmed flight paths, but actually flying. Reading the sky like a text written in wind and pressure, temperature and humidity. Guardian Angel, we're approaching the crash site coordinates, called out Captain Park's weak voice from the ground. I can hear your engines. Elena peered through the swirling mist and spotted a thin column of smoke rising from a ledge halfway down the canyon wall. The crash site was on a narrow shelf of rock, barely wide enough for a helicopter landing, if a helicopter could have survived the wind conditions. Charlie Leader, there's your target. I'm going to make a marking pass to show you the approach. Vector. Elena nosed the T-38 into a steep dive, threading between 2 towering rock spires that seemed to reach for her aircraft like grasping fingers. The wind tried to slam her into the canyon wall, but she compensated with tiny control inputs, reading the aircraft's responses and adjusting her flight path accordingly. She flashed past the crash site at high speed, rocking her wings to mark the location, then pulled into a climbing turn that brought her back to the formation's altitude. "Did you see that approach?" Kellerman's voice was tight with tension. "Guardian angel, that looked impossible." "It's not impossible," Elena replied calmly. "It's just flying. Charlie 2 and 3, you maintain altitude and provide top cover. Charlie leader, you're with me for the rescue approach." As she set up for another pass, Elena's radio crackled with an angry transmission from base. "All aircraft, this is control. You are ordered to abort the rescue mission immediately and return to base. Captain Rodriguez, you are conducting an unauthorized operation and will face criminal charges." Elena switched off the official channel and focused on the emergency frequency. She thought about the crash pilots below, one of whom had been kind enough to look at her weather analysis when everyone else dismissed it. She thought about the bureaucratic system that would rather protect its own reputation than save lives. "Charlie leader, are you ready for the rescue approach? Guardian angel ... Kellerman's voice was uncertain. "If we follow your lead and something goes wrong, our careers are over." Elena felt a familiar stab of disappointment. Even now, with lives on the line, politics and career protection mattered more than doing what was right. "Charlie leader, you don't have to follow me, but I'm going down there either way." She banked the T-38 into another steep descent, alone once again. The canyon walls closed in around her like a trap, and the winds tried to dash her aircraft against the rocks. But Elena had been flying in conditions like this for years, back when she was doing reconnaissance work that nobody wanted to acknowledge. She thought about Lieutenant Webb, who had died in similar conditions because her warnings were ignored. She thought about all the briefings where her expertise was dismissed, all the time she'd been told to step aside for pilots with better equipment and official backing. Not today. "Guardian angel, this is Charlie leader." Kellerman's voice came through the static, firm with resolve. "We're on your wing. Lead the way." Elena's heart swelled with gratitude and determination. She wasn't alone after all. "Charlie leader, follow my exact flight path. When I bank left, you bank left. When I climb, you climb. Don't think about it. Just mirror my movements." "Copy. Guardian angel, we're with you." Elena led the formation into the depths of Devil's Canyon, her weathered T-38 cutting through the turbulent air like a scalpel. Behind her, the modern F-35 struggled to keep up, their computer systems overwhelmed by the chaotic wind patterns. For the first time in years, Elena Rodriguez was exactly where she belonged, in the cockpit of an aircraft, flying a mission that nobody else could complete, proving that skill and experience mattered more than politics and shiny equipment. The rescue was about to begin. Elena's T-38 carved through the turbulent air like a knife through silk, her decades of experience translating into smooth, precise movements that seemed to defy the chaotic winds. Behind her, Captain Kellerman fought to keep his F-35 in formation, the advanced jet's computer systems struggling to process the rapidly changing flight conditions. "Guardian angel, I'm getting system warnings." Kellerman's voice was tight with stress. "The fly-by-wire is fighting me on every control input." "Switch to manual override," Elena advised, her voice calm despite the aircraft bucking around her. "Trust your hands, not the computers." She led them through a series of turns that followed the invisible corridors of stable air she'd mapped in her mind over countless hours of study. The canyon walls flashed past, close enough to touch, but Elena never wavered from her chosen path. "Charlie 3, this is Guardian Angel. I need you to pop a smoke flare so we can see you clearly." Captain Park's voice came through weakly from the crash site. "Flare is away. Guardian Angel. Red smoke, northwest corner of the ledge. Elena spotted the crimson plume immediately, a bright marker against the gray stone. The crash site was worse than she'd expected. The F-35 had hit the ledge hard. Its fuselage crumpled, and one wing completely sheared off. But the fact that Park was conscious and communicating was a miracle. Charlie leader, I'm going to demonstrate the approach pattern. Watch my altitude and angle carefully. Elena nosed the T-38 into a controlled descent, using the canyon walls to shield her from the worst of the crosswinds. She flew past the crash site at precisely the right speed and angle to give the rescue helicopters a clear view of the approach path, then pulled up into a climbing turn. Guardian Angel, this is Rescue 1, came a new voice over the radio. We've been monitoring your transmissions. Medical helicopters are inbound, but we need a safe approach vector. Elena's heart raced. The rescue helicopters had been grounded earlier due to the severe weather, but they were coming anyway. She had to get this right, not just for the crashed pilots, but for the helicopter crews who would risk their lives to reach them. Rescue 1, this is Guardian Angel. I'll mark the approach corridor for you. Follow my smoke trail and maintain exactly my altitude profile. She reached into her emergency kit and pulled out a smoke canister, then began another descent toward the crash site. This time, she activated the smoke as she flew, creating a visible trail through the air that showed the safe path through the treacherous winds. The T-38 shuddered as it hit a pocket of severe turbulence, but Elena compensated smoothly, her control inputs so precise they seemed instinctive. She had become one with the aircraft, reading its every response and adjusting her flight path accordingly. Incredible, came Kellerman's voice. Guardian Angel, how are you making that look so easy? It's not easy, Elena replied, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cockpit's cool air. It's just what I've been training for my whole career. She completed the approach demonstration and climbed back to formation altitude, where Kellerman was waiting with obvious admiration. Guardian Angel, I owe you an apology, he said. I've been flying for 8 years, and I thought I knew what real piloting looked like. I was wrong. Elena didn't respond immediately, focused on monitoring the radio chatter as the rescue helicopters approached the canyon. She could hear the strain in the helicopter pilots' voices as they fought the same winds that had nearly claimed the F-35s. Rescue 1, this is Guardian Angel. You're drifting too far north. Adjust heading to follow my smoke trail exactly. Copy, Guardian Angel. This is some of the worst turbulence I've ever encountered. Stay focused on the trail. Don't trust your instruments in these conditions. Elena watched anxiously as the first helicopter appeared through the canyon's mouth, its rotors churning the mist into spirals. The aircraft looked impossibly fragile against the massive stone walls, but its pilot followed Elena's guidance with steady determination. Rescue 1 is on approach, came the helicopter pilot's voice. I have visual on the crash site. Elena held her breath as the helicopter descended toward the narrow ledge where Captain Park waited with her injured colleague. The winds tried to push the aircraft into the canyon wall, but the pilot compensated skillfully, using Elena's marked approach path to find the pockets of stable air. Rescue 1 is on deck, the pilot announced. Beginning medical evacuation. Elena felt a surge of relief and pride. Her knowledge of the canyon's wind patterns had guided both the F-35 formation and the rescue helicopters to the crash site safely. For the first time in years, her expertise had been not just acknowledged but desperately needed. Guardian Angel, this is Charlie 3, came Captain Park's voice, stronger now that help had arrived. I don't know how you learned to fly like that, but you saved our lives today. Elena's throat tightened with emotion. Just doing my job, Charlie 3. No, Park replied firmly. You went way beyond your job today. You're a real pilot, Elena. The best I've ever seen." As the rescue helicopters lifted off with the injured pilots, Elena led the F-35 formation back through the canyon toward home. The return flight was smoother, the winds beginning to calm as the afternoon progressed. But Elena knew that the real storm was waiting for her back at Falcon Ridge. Major Hammond would be furious about her unauthorized flight, and there would be consequences to face. She had defied direct orders and conducted an operation without clearance. She had also saved 2 lives and proven that real flying skill couldn't be replaced by computers and politics. For the first time in 3 years, Elena Rodriguez felt like a pilot again. The Falcon Ridge tarmac was buzzing with activity when Elena touched down. Emergency vehicles were positioned near the landing area, and she could see Major Hammond pacing beside the control tower, his face dark with anger. Military police officers flanked him, their expressions stern and professional. Elena taxied the T-38 to its usual spot at the far end of the flight line, her hands steady on the controls, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The old aircraft had performed flawlessly during the rescue, its analog systems proving more reliable than the computer-controlled jets in the chaotic wind conditions. As she shut down the engines, Elena could see Hammond approaching with his entourage. She took a deep breath, removed her helmet, and prepared for the confrontation she knew was coming. "Captain Rodriguez." Hammond's voice carried across the tarmac as she climbed down from the cockpit. "You are under arrest for disobeying direct orders and conducting unauthorized flight operations." Elena stood beside her aircraft, her flight suit wrinkled and damp with sweat, but her expression calm and resolute. Around the flight line, other pilots and ground crew had gathered to watch the confrontation, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Sir," Elena replied evenly, "I conducted a rescue operation that saved the lives of 2 pilots. You conducted an unauthorized flight that endangered multiple aircraft and violated every protocol in the book." Hammond's face was red with anger. "You were explicitly ordered to remain on the ground." One of the military police officers stepped forward with handcuffs, but Elena held up a hand. "Before you arrest me, sir, I think you should know that I have detailed documentation of my weather analysis and the conditions that led to today's incident." Hammond's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Elena reached into her flight suit and pulled out a thick folder filled with weather maps, wind pattern analyses, and atmospheric data. "I've been tracking the meteorological conditions in Devil's Canyon for months. Every single dangerous wind pattern that occurred today was predicted in my reports. Your unauthorized weather observations are irrelevant. My observations that could have prevented today's crash if anyone had bothered to listen to them," Elena interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. "Lieutenant Webb died in similar conditions because my warnings were ignored. I wasn't going to let it happen again." The crowd around them had grown larger, and Elena noticed several base personnel recording the confrontation with their phones. Among the watching pilots, she saw Captain Kellerman and some of the other squadron members who had witnessed her flying skills firsthand. "Captain Rodriguez," Hammond said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you are relieved of all flying duties pending a formal investigation. You will surrender your wings and report to the base commander immediately." Elena felt a cold fury building in her chest. After risking her life to save 2 pilots, after proving her skills in the most challenging conditions possible, they were still going to ground her. "Sir, with respect, I think you should reconsider that decision." "Are you threatening?" Captain, I'm informing you that every aspect of today's incident has been recorded and documented. The radio transmissions, the flight data, the meteorological conditions, all of it. And it clearly shows that my unauthorized weather analysis was completely accurate, while the official forecasts were dangerously wrong." Hammond's confident expression wavered slightly. That's irrelevant to your insubordination. Is it? Elena pulled out her phone and began scrolling through saved files. Because I also have documentation showing that I submitted formal weather warnings about Devil's Canyon 3 weeks ago. Warnings that were dismissed without review. She found the email thread she was looking for and held up the phone so Hammond could see the screen. Here's my original analysis predicting exactly the conditions that occurred today. And here's the response from your office, dismissing it as speculative and outside my area of responsibility. The crowd pressed closer, and Elena could see several people taking photos of the email thread. Among the watchers, she spotted Tony Vasquez, the master sergeant who had encouraged her earlier. He was smiling grimly and recording everything on his phone. Those emails are classified communications. Hammond started to protest. No, sir. They're not. They're routine weather reports submitted through proper channels. The same channels that ignored my warnings about the exact conditions that nearly killed 2 pilots today. Captain Kellerman stepped forward from the crowd. Sir, I was there for the rescue operation. Captain Rodriguez's flying was extraordinary. Without her knowledge of the canyon winds, we never would have reached the crash site. That's right. Called out one of the helicopter pilots who had arrived with the medical team. Guardian Angel guided us through conditions that should have been impossible. She saved those pilots' lives. Hammond looked around at the growing crowd, his authority clearly slipping. This is not a public hearing. Actually, sir, I think it is, Elena said quietly. Because I'm not the only one who's been marginalized for doing their job too well. How many other pilots have been grounded for inconvenient expertise? How many warnings have been ignored because they came from the wrong people? She looked directly at the crowd of watching personnel. For 3 years, I've been flying a trainer aircraft because I was reassigned after my warnings about mountain flying were ignored. Lieutenant Webb died because the system preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Hammond's face went pale, and Elena could see the moment when he realized the full implications of what was happening. Captain Rodriguez, he said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this matter privately. Elena smiled coldly. I think we've done enough discussing in private, sir. It's time for some transparency. She turned to address the crowd directly. Every pilot here deserves to know that safety reports are being ignored when they're inconvenient. You deserve to know that expertise is being sidelined in favor of politics. Tony Vasquez stepped forward, his weathered face serious. Captain's right. I've seen too many good pilots pushed aside because they asked hard questions or challenged the status quo. More voices joined in, ground crew and pilots alike sharing their own experiences with ignored warnings and dismissed expertise. Hammond looked increasingly desperate as the situation spiraled beyond his control. This discussion is over, he shouted, but his voice was lost in the growing murmur of discontent from the assembled personnel. Elena felt a surge of vindication. For the first time in years, people were listening. The truth was finally coming out, and there was no way to stuff it back into the shadows where it had been hidden. The investigation will proceed as planned, Hammond said, trying to regain control. Captain Rodriguez will be confined to quarters. Pending. Actually, Major, came a new voice from the edge of the crowd. I think we need to talk. Everyone turned to see Colonel James Morrison, the base commander, approaching with several senior officers. His expression was unreadable, but Elena noticed he was carrying a tablet that appeared to contain official communications. The real reckoning was about to begin. Colonel Morrison's presence immediately changed the atmosphere on the tarmac. The crowd of pilots and ground crew stepped back respectfully, but Elena noticed they didn't disperse entirely. Word of the confrontation had spread throughout the base, and everyone wanted to see how it would end. "Major Hammond," Colonel Morrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a career military officer. "I've been monitoring the radio transmissions from today's rescue operation. I think we need to have a conversation about what happened." "Here." Hammond straightened, clearly relieved to have his superior officer present. "Sir, Captain Rodriguez conducted an unauthorized flight in direct violation of my orders. She endangered multiple aircraft and she saved 2 lives." Morrison interrupted, his eyes fixed on the tablet in his hands. "I have the complete radio logs right here." Captain Rodriguez provided navigation guidance that allowed both the F-35 formation and the rescue helicopters to reach the crash site safely. Elena felt her heart racing as Morrison scrolled through the digital records. Everything that had happened was documented in the radio transmissions and flight data recordings. There would be no way to spin or bury the truth this time. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I've been reviewing Captain Rodriguez's personnel file and her previous assignments. It seems she has extensive experience in mountain flying and adverse weather operations." Hammond's confident expression began to crack. "Sir, her current assignment is appropriate for her skill level, is it?" Morrison looked up from his tablet, his gaze sharp. "Because according to these records, Captain Rodriguez flew over 200 combat reconnaissance missions in some of the most challenging terrain in the world. She has more mountain flying experience than any other pilot on this base." Elena felt a surge of validation. Someone with authority was finally looking at her actual qualifications instead of dismissing her based on politics and prejudice. "I've also been reviewing the meteorological reports for Devil's Canyon," Morrison continued. "It appears, Captain, Rodriguez submitted detailed weather analysis 3 weeks ago that predicted exactly the conditions that caused today's incident. Can't you explain why these reports were not incorporated into the official briefings?" Hammond shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, those reports were speculative. They came from unauthorized sources and couldn't be verified through official channels." "Unauthorized sources?" Morrison's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Captain Rodriguez is a qualified pilot and former reconnaissance specialist. Her weather analysis appears to be more accurate than our official meteorological reports." Elena watched as Hammond's carefully constructed authority began to crumble. Around them, the assembled personnel listened with obvious interest as the truth finally came to light. "Colonel," Elena said quietly, "I have documentation of multiple warnings that were dismissed over the past 3 years. Not just about Devil's Canyon, but about various safety issues that were considered inconvenient to address." Morrison nodded. "I'd like to see those documents, Captain. In fact, I'd like you to brief me on all of your concerns at your earliest convenience." "Sir," Hammond interjected desperately, "Captain Rodriguez still violated direct orders. Regardless of the outcome, she conducted an unauthorized flight to save the lives of 2 pilots who were trapped because official weather reports were inadequate." Morrison finished. "Major, I think we need to discuss your decision-making process in private." The crowd began to murmur appreciatively as it became clear which way the wind was blowing. Elena felt years of frustration and marginalization beginning to lift from her shoulders. Captain Kellerman stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, Captain Rodriguez's flying skills today were extraordinary. She guided us through conditions that our advanced flight systems couldn't handle. Without her expertise, we would have lost 2 pilots." "That's right," added one of the rescue helicopter pilots. "Guardian Angel's navigation was the only reason we could reach the crash site. I've been flying search and rescue for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone read wind patterns like that." Morrison looked around at the assembled crowd, taking in their obvious support for Elena. It seems Captain Rodriguez has earned considerable respect from her fellow aviators. Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. After years of being ignored and sidelined, people were finally recognizing her abilities and standing up for her. "Colonel," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt, "I don't want special treatment. I just want the opportunity to use my skills to keep people safe. That's what I've always wanted." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "Captain, based on what I've seen today and what I'm hearing from your colleagues, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your assignment and responsibilities on this base." He turned to Hammond. "Major, you and I will discuss the decision-making process that led to today's incident. I have some concerns about how safety reports have been handled." Hammond's face went pale as he realized the full implications of what was happening. His career was about to come under intense scrutiny, while Elena's expertise was finally being recognized. "As for you, Captain Rodriguez," Morrison continued, "I want you to prepare a comprehensive briefing on mountain flying conditions and safety protocols. It appears we have some gaps in our knowledge that need to be addressed." Elena straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity settling on her shoulders. "Yes, sir. I'll have a complete analysis ready within 24 hours. As the crowd began to disperse, Elena noticed the looks of respect and admiration from her fellow pilots. Tony Vasquez approached with a wide grin. "Told you it would matter when." "It counted," he said quietly. "Looks like they finally figured out what we've known all along. You're one hell of a pilot." Elena looked back at her weathered T-38, sitting proudly at the edge of the tarmac. Tomorrow, things would be different. Her voice would be heard, her expertise valued, and her warnings heeded. The forgotten pilot had finally been remembered. 6 months later, Elena Rodriguez stood before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, a presentation remote in her hand and years of vindication reflected in her confident posture. The projection screen behind her displayed detailed wind pattern analyses and safety protocols that had become standard curriculum for mountain flying operations. The key to understanding mountain meteorology, she explained to the audience, of young pilots is recognizing that computers can process data, but they can't read the sky. That skill comes from experience, careful observation, and the willingness to trust your instincts when the instruments disagree with reality. In the front row sat Colonel Morrison, now promoted to general, and several senior Air Force officials, who had traveled specifically to hear her speak. Her expertise in adverse weather flying had become legendary throughout the service, and her safety protocols had already prevented numerous incidents. Elena clicked to the next slide, showing a detailed map of Devil's Canyon. 6 months ago, 2 pilots nearly died because official weather reports missed critical atmospheric conditions. Today, that same canyon is used for advanced training, exercises, but only with proper wind analysis and safety protocols. She paused, looking out at the eager faces of the young aviators. The lesson isn't that technology is bad or that computers can't help us. The lesson is that human expertise and careful observation remain irreplaceable components of safe flying. After her presentation, Elena was approached by Captain Lisa Park, who had recovered fully from her injuries and was now serving as an instructor pilot herself. "Elena," Lisa said warmly, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did that day. But more importantly, I wanted to thank you for not giving up when everyone told you to stay quiet." Elena smiled. "I couldn't let what happened to Lieutenant Webb happen to anyone else. Sometimes you have to fight for the right to do your job." "Well, your fight paid off for all of us," Lisa replied. "My students learn your wind analysis techniques from day one now. You've probably saved more lives than you'll ever know." As the crowd dispersed, Elena walked outside to where her new aircraft waited. She'd been reassigned to a frontline F-35 squadron and given the additional responsibility of developing advanced weather analysis protocols for the entire Air Force. but she'd insisted on keeping her old T-38 as well, using it for specialized training missions where its analog systems provided valuable lessons about fundamental flying skills. Tony Vasquez was waiting beside the newer jet, a tablet in his hand showing the maintenance status. "Both birds are ready to go, Captain," he said with a grin. "Though I still think you look more natural in the Talon." "Different tools for different jobs, Tony," Elena replied. "The F-35 has capabilities I need for some missions, but the T-38 teaches things about flying that no computer can simulate." As they spoke, a young lieutenant approached nervously. "Captain Rodriguez, I'm Lieutenant Amanda Thompson. I've been assigned to your mountain flying program." Elena studied the young woman, seeing something of her younger self in the earnest expression and slight uncertainty. "Have you reviewed the preliminary materials?" "Yes, ma'am. I've read all your canyon, wind analyses, and safety protocols. I'm particularly interested in your work on manual navigation techniques for GPS-denied environments." Elena smiled, remembering her own eagerness to learn from experienced pilots when she was starting out. "Good. We'll start with basic wind reading exercises tomorrow. Fair warning, this isn't like the computer-assisted flying you learned in training. You'll need to develop instincts that go beyond what instruments can tell you." "I understand, ma'am. I want to learn to fly the way you do." Elena looked up at the sky, where afternoon clouds were building over the mountains. The same winds that had once trapped and nearly killed pilots were now mapped and understood, their dangers quantified and their safe passages clearly marked. "Lieutenant," she said thoughtfully, "the goal isn't to fly the way I do. The goal is to fly the way you do, but with all the knowledge and skills you can possibly acquire. Every pilot brings something different to the cockpit." She turned back to Thompson. "But I can teach you to read the sky, to trust your instincts when the computers fail, and to never let anyone tell you that your expertise doesn't matter." As the sun set over Falcon Ridge, painting the tarmac in shades of gold and orange, Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The forgotten pilot had not only been remembered, she had become the teacher, the expert, the voice that others sought out when the stakes were highest. Major Hammond had been quietly transferred to a desk job at the Pentagon after an investigation revealed a pattern of ignoring safety reports and sidelining experienced pilots. His replacement, Major Jennifer Walsh, had implemented new protocols, ensuring that all safety concerns receive proper review regardless of their source. Elena's story had spread throughout the military aviation community, inspiring other overlooked experts to speak up and share their knowledge. Her weather analysis techniques were being taught at bases around the world, and her emphasis on fundamental flying skills had sparked a renaissance in manual flying proficiency. But perhaps most importantly, a new generation of pilots was learning. That expertise earned through experience was just as valuable as the latest technology, and that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the one you need where everything goes wrong. As Elena climbed into her F-35 for an evening training flight, she carried with her the knowledge that she had not only reclaimed her place as a pilot, but had ensured that future aviators would never face the dismissal and marginalization she had endured. The sky was wide open, and Elena Rodriguez was finally free to fly wherever her skills and courage could take her. Elena's story reminds us that expertise isn't always found in the newest equipment or the highest ranks. Sometimes the most valuable knowledge comes from the person sitting quietly in the corner, overlooked but never giving up. When we silence experienced voices for the sake of politics or convenience, we risk losing the very insights that could save lives. If you've ever felt dismissed or overlooked despite having valuable knowledge to share, remember Elena's example. Keep documenting, keep learning, and keep speaking up. Your expertise matters, even when others can't see it yet. Sometimes the most important flight is the one nobody wants you to take. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.